name is Shelley Maestrin. I'm the chair of the Reston Historic Trust. We're delighted to have you here this evening to hear Dr. Paul Ceruzzi of the Smithsonian, who's going to talk about the evolution and development of the high-tech corridor from Tysons to Dulles Airport. Before I tell you a little bit about him, I also just want to put a couple of plugs in about the group that's sponsoring this event this evening, the Reston Historic Trust. Many of you are members, of course, of our organization. Just want to remind you that we're a nonprofit and we're always in search of funding. So, open your pocketbook, pull out your wallet, and, consider us in your estate planning. And you've got brochures from Lynn to that effect. I also want to tell you that we have a wonderful new set of items in our shop at the museum. We're having a reception for the artists on December 6th. We have a number of items from local artists in Reston that would really round out your Christmas shopping list. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Ceruzzi. I think you have a flyer on your chair that you can read more about him, but he is the curator of aerospace, electronics, and computing at the Smithsonian. And his expertise is way beyond me, microelectronics, computing, and control as they apply to the practice of air and space flight. Dr. Ceruzzi has a degree from Yale and a graduate degree from the University of Kansas. He has a PhD from there in American Studies. He's written a number of books, one of which I can highly recommend, Internet Alley, which is all about the evolution of Tysons Corner and the whole corridor and how high-tech and computing got put its roots down in the Northern Virginia area and thrived from there. So with no more of that, I will now introduce or bring forward Dr. Ceruzzi.
Thank you very much, Shelley, and thanks for inviting me. It's really a great honor to be here and a pleasure. And let me see if I can get this to, there we go. Okay, well, thanks for the introduction. It makes me a little nervous, but I want to start out by just telling a very brief story about how I came to work on this project, on this study, and write that book. I've been at the Smithsonian for about 30 years, and when I before I came here, I had heard about Tysons Corner in a very strange way. I had a ham radio license, and I had heard, if you had tuned through the shortwave radio bands, occasionally you would hear these streams of random numbers. And nobody could figure out what they were, usually a woman's voice, sometimes in Spanish. And we believed that they were communicating with spies, either the CIA to spies overseas, or the Soviets to spies in the United States. And this newsletter of the ham radio club that I was in said that the transmissions came from a place called Tysons Corner, Virginia, which I had never heard of. And but then the very next newsletter said, no, it's wrong. They don't come from Tysons Corner. Well, of course, if you're a conspiracy nut, and nothing like a denial to get your blood, So I came, when I came to the Smithsonian, I drove past it, and sure enough, there's that famous radio tower with the sign saying photography is forbidden, Internal Security Act of 1950. Okay, so I said, something's going on, but it sort of dropped, and by the way, you can still hear these number stations, although they've dropped away, but they are indeed ways of communicating with spies who have a decoding book and sometimes on their computer, but quite rare these days, but they don't come from Tysons Corner. Unfortunately, sad to say. In fact, that tower, I'm sure you've all seen it. Don't take a picture of it, but it has a weather dome, a next generation weather dome on top. So that's civilian, lots of cell phone antennas, and there's probably some military stuff as well. But there's military towers all over the place. So anyway, that's how I got started on this whole thing, and you've probably all seen either this picture or a picture like it. This is the year that Sputnik went up, 1957. There's the Tysons Corner grocery store. This is Chainbridge Road right here. This gentleman left the door of his pickup truck open. He might have even left the motor running while he went in to do some shopping. So you can get a sense of what that was like. Fairfax County obviously was a very important dairy farming community. You have this huge market for milk and eggs and things like that and vegetables. So that's no surprise that Fairfax County would be a place to supply those things, and that's what that store symbolizes. So actually, it began before Sputnik, and I'm going to skip over this kind of rapidly, but this gentleman, a Yankee from New England, Vannevar Bush, was brought to Washington, D.C. He had a very close personal relationship with Franklin D. Roosevelt. He had gone to MIT, had been a professor at Tufts University, an engineering professor, and he conceived of this idea of creating an office of scientific research and development whereby they would give out contracts to primarily universities to do war-related research. And that was a kind of breakthrough or transition that had not been seen prior to Bush. Military research was done in military laboratories. A lot of it still is, but this was a very clean break with that, where there was actually contracting done with universities and sometimes private entities. And in some ways, that begins what is now the essence of the Dulles Corridor, namely private contractors. I won't go into too much of this, except that one of the things that came out of World War II was something called operations research. Actually came from the UK. The idea that you have scientists inventing weapons, very high technology weapons during World War II, but what good is the weapon if you don't train the soldiers how to use them properly? And one of the big inventions was radar. But you had to train people to use radar properly. And that developed into a whole science of operations research, which developed techniques to kind of bring the inventions from the laboratory into actual use. And it was not, what's important is that it was not, you're not making hardware. Very little hardware is actually made in Tysons or the Dulles Corridor, but there's a lot of operations research, or whatever it's called today, the modern variation of it. That's what comes out of here. A cynic would say that what comes out of Tysons Corner is PowerPoint. But seriously, they do real scientific work, and Reston as well. So another very significant event that happened was the movement of the War Department across the river. And this was actually something that was debated quite a bit, that the War Department, this was before Pearl Harbor, the War Department was outgrowing its headquarters in D.C. The Constitution implied that they had to stay in the District of Columbia, but in fact they moved into Arlington, which of course had been part of the district until 1846, when it was retroceded back to Virginia because nobody thought they'd need the land. But in any event, it was built in Arlington, and there's some very funny stories about how the site was chosen. Apparently, FDR himself went out there in an open car, and a big fight broke out in the back seat between two people who were arguing about where the thing should be. And Roosevelt turned around and said, "I'm the commander-in-chief, put it here." So there it is. And the interesting thing is that it's a modern building in the sense that the main way to get there is by automobile. You can't really walk there. In fact, you can take a boat there. But walking is very difficult. It has a metro stop, of course, and it has buses, but it's really an automobile-oriented building, and they've built a tremendous number of highways. Ironic in the view of the fact that they had gasoline rationing during the war afterwards, but that's the Pentagon. So, in Arlington. So, The other thing, I'm gonna skip over this because I think people's eyes glaze over when they see a lot of acronyms, but the point I want to make here is that these operations research companies or entities, the federal government chafed at the fact, and if there's anybody who's a civil servant in the audience, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The civil service salaries weren't high enough, in their opinion, to attract top talent. So they came up with a very clever solution of creating something which a lot of Washingtonians know about, the FFRDC, Federally Funded Research and Development Corporation, which is basically a way around the civil service regulations. So you can pay these people a higher salary. And there are a few, like the RAND Corporation in Santa Monica. This one, Institute for Defense Analysis, is in Arlington. Very significant one, though, that has been forgotten, was the Operations Research Office, which was on Connecticut Avenue in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And it was administered by Johns Hopkins University. And there was a dispute between the Army and Hopkins. And Hopkins wanted to retain control. The Army really wanted these people to sort of be their gophers in a way. They wanted to deliver research that they really, very directed research. Anyway, the upshot of the fight was that it was dissolved and reconstituted as the Research Analysis Corporation and moved to Tysons Corner, which at that time was still farmland and gravel pits. So that was a very crucial move and was the beginning of Tysons Corner. And here it is here. Which one of these is there? There it is there. It's now where the Capital One building is, I think. This is the McLean Metro stop right here. But you can see farmland, gravel pits. Teenagers tell me, well, grown-ups now tell me that when they were teenagers, they used to race their motorcycles here illegally, but they'd have a great time, lots of open space. MITRE, there's another FFRDC. This was how it began in the early 60s. Take a look at this picture, very important. Couple of things. You see the Beltway, you see Route 7, there's the corner, there's the tower. But notice the Dulles Access Road, it stops. The idea was that the Dulles Access Road was supposed to go into DC and cross at a place called Three Sisters, which are these rocks in the Potomac. That was stopped. So when you came out of Dulles Airport, you stop at Tysons Corner. And then, now they did improve Chain Bridge Road, which made the people of McLean very upset. They didn't like all this traffic in there, and they really didn't want, even to this day, Tysons development doesn't go this way. But in my book, which Shelley mentioned, I talk about how there was no connection at Reston, but in fact, you could get off the access road at Reston from Dulles Airport, but you could not get on the access road at Reston to go into DC. So that was a crucial thing that affected the initial development of Reston, was the limited. What is the date of that? This is, well, this is 1962 was when Dulles, so approximately 62, 64, something like that. Right? So in 1962, Dulles opens, Reston is opening. The Beltway opens in 1964, the complete circumference of the Beltway. So those are the crucial dates. Somebody say 64, I believe, the completion of the Beltway. So I think also that was when the original corner, which was that crossroads, was replaced by that semi-interchange. But notice the farmland and the gravel pits. So there's Research Analysis Corporation. So here's another set of acronyms. I'll skip over them. The FFRDCs didn't really solve that problem, especially the RAND Corporation, after a man named Daniel Ellsberg leaked documents to the New York Times. And along comes private companies that said, forget the FFRDC, give us the contracts and we will keep a secret and we'll give you the research you want. So you have companies like Braddock, Dunn and McDonald, Planning Research Corporation, SAIC, which is a huge, huge presence in Tysons today. Khaki, California. Notice that a lot of these began in California. California Analysis Center, DynCorp, which was at one time headquartered right here in Reston. I don't know if it still is. So these were private companies, and one of the interesting things about them is that as private companies, when they, if they would go public and have an initial public offering on Wall Street, the founders became very, very wealthy. Something you can't do if you're a federal employee. So I just want to mention it. I don't know how many, okay. Interesting, these companies are almost all gone now except for SAIC. They're all part of Northrop Grumman or Lockheed Martin or Boeing. It's all. If you drive down Gallows Road, there's a road that used to be called Boeing Court, and it's now called SAIC Court. Okay. They've got their own stop on the metro now on the Silver Line. Okay, so let me back up a little bit. It's a funny story. Here, start at the beginning, go back. Let's talk about the WNOD. It was chartered as the Alexandria, Loudoun, in Hampshire. There was a famous skirmish in Vienna, Virginia in 1861, regarded as the first skirmish of the Civil War in Northern Virginia. And you can, if you ever ride your bike or walk on that stretch outside of Vienna, you can see a plaque to that effect, where a train was ambushed by Confederates. The idea of that railroad was to tap into the coal fields of Virginia, which is now West Virginia, and bring coal into the DC area. The Civil War really disrupted it. It never got further than Hertzville, Bluemont, the Blue Ridge. It stopped at the Blue Ridge. And, but it was in heavy use for a long time. And it set a pattern of development that persists to this day. Leesburg, obviously, Vienna, Falls Church, a few other towns, Sterling and Herndon, not Fairfax City, and of course, not Reston. I'll get to Reston in a minute. Here's a map that was prepared by the Union Army, and it's interesting that they made it. They didn't quite get it right. They show it going this way. I'm sorry, it's a little bit fuzzy. They show it going up this way, but the actual route is this way. But here's, it wasn't really a Tysons Corner. It was called Peach Grove back then. Here's Reston, Herndon, Sterling, Ashburn. Dulles is over here. Here's Vienna. So it set a lot of development that persists to the present day. You could say the Dulles Access Road is sort of a modern version of this. The other interesting thing, well, I'll get to that. It carried a lot of freight for a long time, eventually went out of business in 1968, and it's now, of course, extremely popular as a recreational trail. A couple of ironies of it: it was never really seriously considered as a route for Metro. The Silver Line goes through the median of the access road. I don't believe it was ever considered seriously for Reston as a, no, I didn't think so. It was a really primitive line, a single track, a lot of grade crossings you couldn't go very fast on. And also the other interesting thing is that it went to Alexandria, it didn't go to DC, although there was a branch that went into DC. So it brought some materials, gravel and sand for the building of Dulles runways, but it really died out in 1968. So here's Reston. A man named Robert Simon had a vision which may have been inspired by Broadacre City, Frank Lloyd Wright's vision of a...
You're joking.
I know you, I've seen a videotape where you said that you don't really agree with Frank Lloyd Wright. Is that...
Did you read the book?
I saw the videotape of a speech you gave about
But did you read the book?
Broadacre City.
Yes.
Yes, I did.
Well, it's the stupidest book that's ever.
I've always wanted to. Okay, on the flyleaf of the book, he has a list of things that he was very passionate about, and a couple of things that he mentioned, he didn't like streetcars. He liked the private automobile. He liked having houses with green space. He didn't like curtains. He figured if you had enough land, you'd have privacy without curtains. And he said that administration would be by radio. Now you just change that to email and you've got the internet. So this Reston is Frank Lloyd Wright's vision. Well, I better make a second edition of my book. But anyway, okay, there we are. Obviously,
Like
Radburn, New Jersey. Yes, I know. Okay, I know about these things. It's a tremendous honor for me to be here. There's no question about this. This city is just beautiful. I mean, everybody knows that. It's just thank you. Thank you very much. But we'll have to postpone this for another time. But okay, I mentioned the limited connection to the access road, which obviously affected it for a while. The toll road opens up around 1985, and then once you've got this toll road in place, boom, things start to really boom here. Dulles Airport gets a tremendous amount of traffic and so forth, but that's not until the mid-1980s. And you probably know the story that the airport was intended for Burke. The residents there complained. They managed to stop it. Eisenhower, this was the days when presidents had real power. He went to a buddy of his from World War II and said, here, do something about this. And he found some land in Chantilly, and they bought enough land to anticipate the oncoming of the jet age. The Boeing 707 was just coming online. So you got plenty of land in Dulles, but it's so far away, they had to build this access road, which we all know about. They also did two more things about Dulles that I want to mention. One is that they reserved the room in the median for mass transit. And there was a story that it was going to be a monorail. That didn't happen. But the median, that means that the Silver Line did not have to buy a right-of-way except through Tysons, because there was hardly no Tysons of any kind at the time, 1962, so they have to make that detour. But anyway, that's the one thing. The second thing they did was in some ways almost as important, and that was originally they were going to have a sewage treatment plant at the airport to dump treated sewage into the Potomac River. Well, the water supply for Washington is downstream of that. And the WSSC, or whatever it was called at the time, said, no, you can't do that. So they prevailed on the planners to build a tunnel under the Potomac to a sewer line called the Potomac Interceptor that goes down along the C&O Canal to the Blue Plains treatment plant below the intake for fresh water. That was a really key development because it meant that you could build Fairfax County to the gills, which is what, if you look at Fairfax County today, they would not have been able to do that if it weren't for that sewage treatment procedure, which came out as almost a byproduct of the Dulles, building Dulles. So that's a kind of interesting thing. It's a beautiful building. This tower is no longer in use, and of course, this controversy over the Silver Line is not actually going to stop here. It's going to, okay. Now I'm going to come back to the present here. The title of my book was called Internet Alley, and if you drive around Virginia, you see these historical plaques all the time, usually about Stonewall Jackson or Robert E. Lee or something like that. Well, here's an interesting one on Wilson Boulevard in Rosslyn. It says, essentially, this is where the internet was invented. Just condense that a little bit. In that building, two gentlemen by the name of Vint Cerf and Robert Kahn, both of whom live in Northern Virginia, developed the protocols which are still in use today, the so-called TCP/IP. So there's a plaque. It was called ARPANET, funded by the Advanced Research Projects Agency of the Defense Department. This, I finally figured out, is the word ARPANET spelled out in the ASCII code. Okay, for those of you who are computer freaks. Anyway, there it is on Wilson Boulevard, 1401 Wilson Boulevard. The irony of this is that the actual code was written in a hotel room in Palo Alto. At least that's what I've been told. The people in Palo Alto just celebrated some anniversary. But they did work up there. The other irony is that directly across the street from this building on Wilson Boulevard was a parking garage, which at the same time as they were developing the protocols for the internet, Woodward and Bernstein were meeting with Deep Throat, the Watergate. So it's, I guess they didn't know of each other. You have to ask yourself which was the more important activity. I would say the ARPANET. That's just me. Okay, so the ARPANET was then transferred to the National Science Foundation, which established these concentrations of internet activity on the east and west coast with backbones, they call them backbones, connecting the two. And at one point, this thing in this parking garage on Gallows Road, or Old Courthouse Road, in Tysons Corner, carried 50% of the world's internet traffic. And you could just walk in there, no security of any kind. So this is what the internet looks like. Or this is what it looked like. Obviously, it doesn't look like that anymore. But that was a place called Metropolitan Access Exchange East in Tysons Corner. So here's the Dulles Corridor reinventing itself. You had those defense contractors, they're still there, usually subsidiaries of, like I say, Northrop Grumman or Boeing, but you've got this internet traffic. When you type in an address to the internet, it's decoded and they find the place, it's like a telephone book. Who has the master telephone book? Well, for a while it was in that building right there in Herndon, right off the W&OD. There's no sign or anything. Since September 11th, it's been dispersed, and I'm not going to go there because it's all secret, but it was there for a long time. Something is still there, but obviously Herndon is one of the places where the central root server of the internet is, the .com registry. Now I'm going to jump out. Shelley mentioned that my book it stopped at Dulles, because at the time I wrote the book about 5 or 6 years ago, that was the end of the line. But things have really hopped over to Ashburn, which was once called Farmwell Station. I know some of you probably know what this is. It's an agricultural community. Smith Switch along the W&OD, and there's this very interesting building in the background. You say, what the heck is that? It's the cloud. You have heard, if you pick up any newspaper or watch TV, everything is in the cloud nowadays. You don't have a hard disk or anything. It's all in the cloud. Where's the cloud? The cloud is in Ashburn, Virginia. Here's what it looks like from the air, from a satellite. And I think the anyway, it's these giant two-story buildings that are filled with basically hard disk drives like you have on your PC, just row after row of disk drives. And that's where your data, everything is stored. Now, Ashburn is only one of many places, but it is a major place for Amazon and companies like that. So for some reason it's in Ashburn. The interesting thing for me about Ashburn is that it's along the W&OD, and if you go on that trail, you see this power line overhead. The reason that trail exists and the reason that railroad did not revert to local ownership is that the power company took the right of way for a power line. So in a sense, the W&OD was built to bring coal energy from the west to the DC area. What it does now, it brings electricity, which is generated out in West Virginia. It's the same thing. It's generated by burning coal, a lot of it. And these cloud servers are huge consumers of electricity. Some of the biggest ones are in the Columbia River Basin out west. So in a sense, the W&OD fulfilled its destiny. The unfortunate thing about it is if you know what Ashburn might have looked like at one time, it doesn't look like that anymore. this is exactly what Reston is not, I guess you could say, sad to say. Although people want to live there. So I'll just conclude by saying, when I wrote that book about 6 years ago, I thought, boy, things are moving fast, but I had no idea how fast things are going to continue to move. The Silver Line is halfway done. There's all kinds of crazy things going on in Tysons Corner now. We've got a station here in Reston. There's all kinds of development going on there. Maybe I'll have to write a second edition, and if I do, I will have to think about that. Something about Frank Lloyd Wright. But thank you very much for telling me that. Yes, thank you again. That's it. Thank you very much.
Well, I know you must have some questions for Dr. Ceruzzi, so please raise your hand and let's have a discussion.
Is there some indication of how much economic activity is generated by this corridor? Is there some measure that has been created?
Yes, and I have the statistic in my book about the taxes of Fairfax County. The revenue into Virginia is greater than about 7 or 8 of the other kind of combined in Southwest Virginia, Southern Virginia. More than 7 or 8 of them at least combined. Just the Dulles corridor alone generates that kind of tax. The irony there is that a lot of it is federal, so it's federal taxes. I don't know how much of that, but yes, it's enormous. It's an enormous economic engine. It's tremendous. It's just staggering, and it manifests itself like the Mercedes dealerships, the Tysons Corner malls, all those kinds of things that exist. Tiffany's and things like this that you wouldn't find almost anywhere else. Certainly not in Ashburn, Virginia, in the farming days or something like that. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
The cloud facilities, do they rely on external power?
They have their own emergency generators, and if you go by them, you can see these massive diesel units, which they test periodically, but generally they get the power from Potomac or Pepco or whoever, Virginia Power.
Can generators keep them fully powered?
They can kick in very fast. I don't know how long that lasts, but they do have fuel there to keep them going for a while. But yes, they do have that capability, because if they go down, our whole economy goes down.
Most of them have fuel for at least 2 weeks, if not 30 days.
Okay, there you go.
How come they're above ground?
Why are they above ground?
Some of them aren't, but I think it's cheaper to build above ground.
I know, but in this world, this day and age,
Well, there's a lot of tight security around these places, I can tell you that. Yes?
I'm curious about the metro, the traffic that the Silver Line is expected to bring to the area.
Yes.
I take it most days, but it's actually more expensive by about $5 a day than it would be for me to drive, you even pay the toll road. Do you know if the cost is expected to level out and promote ridership versus keeping the cost so high that, I mean, I'm sure they're trying to cover construction costs, but.
I really am not sure how they come up with those figures.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume these expectations to push people to use it and bring more people
Well, I mean, one of
and.
the interesting things that's going on is that I don't think anybody could have predicted that the price of gasoline would be going down. And that's kind of strange, because that affects the mix, and
Yes.
people assume that the gas would be so expensive that people would abandon their cars, but that's not happening yet. But on the other hand, there are the other costs of driving and parking and all that, so I really don't know. Yes,
Question about the data servers. You mentioned this big one in Ashburn. There are many in the
Yes.
Washington, D.C. area, and tens of thousands, I think, around the world. But how are they connected? You don't see big power lines that look different, that are carrying the billions of messages
Yes.
per minute.
they're carried on fiber optic cables.
And where are those?
They're underneath the streets.
They're all underground.
Pretty much, yes. And I had a slide there of these, I did this very interesting, there was a hotel being built very close to that, May East, and they painted all these orange things, they don't dig, or something like that. And I went home and Googled the initials that were spray painted on the street, and there were these very obscure companies like Level 3 or something, and it turns out they are the backbone providers, so it's underneath Chainbridge Road or the local roads. This came out when the tunnel was being dug underneath the actual corner. They cut into a cable, and suddenly there was a swarm of these black SUVs which cordoned it off. And so they had to fix. They're underneath the streets. Yes. The interesting thing about the internet is that the mythology of the internet, and it's sort of a lot of truth, is that it's robust because it has a lot of redundancy. In reality, what happens sometimes is that you are a backbone provider and say, oh, here's a trench already dug. I'll just put my cable in there, so you lose the redundancy if you get a backhoe who cuts it. But there's interesting cases where an earthquake severed a cable between Taiwan and mainland China, and in order for them to communicate, they went around the world the other way, and it worked. So there is redundancy, yes, but it's under the ground.
And these data servers, are they owned by companies like Google and
Amazon,
Amazon,
yeah.
or are they separate companies that
Well,
sell?
some of them are set up to sell data. Yeah, we got some guys in the back here who probably know more than I do.
A lot of them are owned by independents, and then they sell to the Amazon and the Googles, although in this area, Amazon and Google and a few others have actually purchased their own assets. But typically across the country, they're kind of like hotels or real estate developers, and they'll lease out, and it's all done by power, the huge megawatts like you're talking about. These things are valued on how much power they have them.
Could you speculate on what would have happened to this area if Dallas Airport had been built?
Well, it'd be different, yeah, I don't know, it could be, there's a lot of what ifs. I mentioned this in my book, the Beltway was only one of 4 beltways. There were going to be 4 beltways. And one of them, if you go by the Kennedy Center, you see this huge interchange that goes nowhere. That was going to be the inner beltway. And then there was going to be Fort Totten that was going to connect the Civil War forts. And then there was going to be an outer beltway, which was where the Fairfax County Parkway is. So only one of them got built. There was a plan, if you know your geography, Pepco has a big generating plant in Dickerson, Maryland. That was originally going to be in off of Sterling, Virginia, or Leesburg, Virginia, and it was going to be served by the WNOD to bring coal. So that would have changed things tremendously. It's now, I think, a Trump golf course or something. There was a plan to build a huge dam at Riverbend, where Riverbend Park is. That's why it's a park, because they bought the property, but the dam, it would have backed up the Potomac all the way to Harper's Ferry. So these things didn't happen. Dulles is here, so here we are. Yes, in the back.
Can you comment on the theory that the reason that the Silver Line was put above ground was because of a national concern in terms of the cables underground? I've heard that from several people.
I don't really know for sure. I think it was a cost measure, really.
Really?
There are a lot of cables underneath Tysons Corner, but then again, there's cables everywhere. So I don't really know.
Yeah.
You got an answer.
This has been a sort of a trip down memory lane after how we moved here in 1971, and just seeing this whole area develop. And you wrote this book called Internet Alley. It's really about an internet superhighway now. Would you, as you think about the next 20, 25 years, what are your thoughts about what's going to happen between here and Dallas and beyond? More boom, or have we maxed out?
Well, first of all, I'm a historian, so I don't have to worry about the future. But no, I mean, there's one of the things I was worried about at the time I was writing the book is that this federal contracting has shrunk. And so they called them Beltway bandits, which was an interesting phrase. You don't hear that anymore because now they're all pretty much lost their independence. But I thought, well, when that goes away, it's all going to dry up. But obviously I was wrong about that. The congestion, just gets worse and worse. I remember a Wall Street Journal article in 1985 saying Tysons Corner is doomed because there's too much traffic. Well, obviously that was wrong. So I don't really know. I think that Shelley and I were talking about how maybe you would have a fleet of these Google driverless cars waiting for you at metro stops so that you would get off the metro and get in one of these pods and it would take you to your destination, and then when you get out it would go back to the metro or wherever. So it would solve this transportation issue. There may be some other high-tech thing. I don't know. Somehow it manages to thrive, but I can't really say what's going to happen. Yes?
With reference to the multiple beltways, the Intercounty Connector in Maryland.
Yes.
If you look at the older maps from the 60s, they show that route.
Yes.
Proposed outer beltway.
They wanted a bridge at.
But it followed exactly the route that they had back in the 60s. I think they even acquired some property back then.
They did, and the problem now is that that's some of the most affluent parts of Montgomery County, Maryland, and the people who live there are going to fight that as a tooth and nail to have a second crossing. The other things that people talk about is this purple line, light rail, which they would say, well, why not extend it all the way across the river, which would make a lot of sense. But yes, sir.
Just for your information, the metro planning people, I'm not really supposed to be talking about this publicly, but let's keep it in this room. They're seriously considering the extension in the long-range plan, we're talking 50 years now, of the purple line over to the Tysons area.
Makes a lot of sense.
It makes complete sense to me, I think.
Well, there was an article in the Post just the other day about people commuting to work from Anacostia or Southeast DC on the Silver Line. So there's lots of jobs, and not just the engineering or high-tech jobs, but the service industries of the mall. People can now get there without an automobile.
What we really need, though, is to have more balance between jobs and housing in each location. That's really the cause of congestion.
That's Reston, but it's not Tysons.
Well, the Tysons plan is going in that direction.
Yeah.
It's not going to reach Reston's level of balance between jobs and housing, but it's going in the right direction.
It'll never have Reston's green space. Yes.
You didn't mention anything about Tysons Labs. A lot of work for the space, the weather, ESSA, and so forth. A lot of that is all instead of hometown.
In New Jersey, yeah. Well, Bell Labs did not have much of a presence here in the DC area. I know of.
They had to fly down here, yeah.
But the companies here have this kind of unique quality to them. They always said that they were not consultants. They always told, I interviewed a lot of these people. We're not consultants. And although there is one company that they proudly call themselves consultants, and that's Booz Allen, which coincidentally is where Snowden worked. But their headquarters was in Bethesda, and they moved to Tysons. They're in Tysons. They call themselves consultants, but these other companies, they'd say, no, a consultant gives you a report and then they walk away and collect their bill. We actually stay with the client until the problem is solved. That's what they told me. Now, whether you agree with that or not, that's what it was. But that was why that's what they claimed was set them apart from consultants, like bandits, whatever. Anybody else?
Paul, can you talk a little bit about the presence of the CIA in the corridor?
Well, the CIA, well, I mean now.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Well-
the headquarters is in Langley,
Yeah.
which was quite an unusual move. It was this affluent suburb surrounded by woods. I think the residents of McLean, who are very well connected and affluent, didn't want to see any more of that. And they kind of put a stop to it, which is why Tysons has this fairly well-defined boundary, and I think it's McGarry Ruins, where this National Counterterrorism Center is. And that's, but yes, the CIA has facilities all up and down here. In fact, I work at the Air and Space Museum in Chantilly, and right across the Route 28 from us is this massive building, which nobody will tell you what it is. It's the CIA. I'm not quite sure what aspect of it is there, but it's there. It's a huge building. We worry about it because we don't want tourists to make a wrong turn, because if you turn in there by mistake, you never see them again. Bad idea. So I think that has not really been as much of a problem.
They're also here in Reston.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. Well, I mean, how do you, well, you know, I mean, how do you know? You know because they don't have any, you know because they have
It's a building with no number.
They have fences.
fences or they have armed guards in the
Fences
parking lot.
around and you can't get in the gate.
Right.
And
Yeah,
what's-
That is, these seem to be along the routes around here.
Yeah, well, it's not just the CIA, there's a lot of other things.
What's the name for the buildings that don't have exterior windows? Oh, they have
yes.
windows, but there's really no,
SCIF,
Right.
Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. It's a room which is highly secure. It's where they discuss things like the actual identities of the spy, for example. And they have all these elaborate safeguards to prevent eavesdropping. There's this myth, I don't know if it's true or not, that if you bounce a laser beam off that door, it picks up the vibrations of my voice and you can actually get, so they don't have any windows, but if you look at a building in Tysons Corner, they have these window facades. So what they have is a set of windows and then some space and then a windowless room, which is the SCIF. And that's one of the things that the real estate developers, I talked to some of them for my book, they're very shrewd. They put in all these amenities, they make nice woods and trees and everything, they hide the parking lot with a berm of earth and things like that. But they were very careful, at least in the 80s, they were very careful not to make the building look too expensive, because they had to go to the Pentagon to get their money, and the Pentagon is this very Spartan place, deliberately. And they didn't want to make it look like they were wasting the government money, so they built the buildings to look modest, but they didn't skimp on what they considered the important stuff, like the security, like the comfort of the employees who work there. So it's an interesting architectural signature of Tysons Corner, but every once in a while somebody violates that. You know, like USA Today, they built this enormously glass thing, and of course they built it, the day they opened it was the day that newspapers started to go out of business because of the internet. It's like not good timing for them, you know? I don't hope nobody works for USA Today. But
There's one of those buildings off Sunset Hills.
It's ostentatious.
No, quite the opposite.
Oh, it's plain.
Totally plain,
Well, that's-
no window,
yeah, that's-
very large
Something goes
building
on
in the middle of it.
That's what we do. I mean, it's, I could spend a lot, well, I stopped worrying about that when I found out where the numbers transmissions were coming from. They came from, I think, Fish Hill Farms in Warrenton, Virginia. Someplace, Remington, Virginia, I think is, but I actually was, I still have one of these radios, I gotta tell this story. I have one of these radios at home. And my son was about 12 years old at the time, and he was playing around, and all of a sudden these numbers in Spanish started coming out of the radio. It's like, oh my God, I thought these things were long gone. You think with the internet now, you don't need this. They're very loud. And then about a month later, they arrested a couple in Cleveland Park as Cuban spies. Okay? And they confiscated their laptop. According to the Washington Post, they had a program in there to decode numbers. So it's still there, but not from Tysons Corner. So anyway, I don't know why. I have to tell that story. But yes, I guess there's a lot of, I mean, it's part of what we do in Washington. But you know, it's an interesting thing about Tysons is that they want to make it into a walkable community where you get off the metro and you walk through a grid of streets. But some of these companies, they don't want you anywhere near them. You know, like you walk near one of these buildings, they'll come out at you with a gun. What are you doing here? So I think there's going to be some interesting things going on here. They certainly don't want a Starbucks on the first floor of the place. You know, they really don't want that. But if they don't have that, what are you going to do when you get off the metro? Anybody? Go ahead. Yeah.
It's interesting that all the new stations on the Silver Line are basically built without any kind of parking, except for the train drop-off parking.
Right. Yes.
I'm curious if, obviously they're trying to make more walking communities,
Yes.
move cars, get people
Yes.
out of parking lots to begin with,
Sure.
get cars out of parking lots so that people who have to drive have a place to park, I guess. But do you know if the rest of the Silver Line is going to be planned the same way? It's interesting in a juxtaposition to like all the metro stations in Maryland, or at least where I used to take metro from, where massive parking
Shady
garage.
Grove, yes. and
Yeah,
Grove,
New Carrollton, parking garages
Yeah,
pretty much circling them.
they're going to have one at the very end in Loudoun County. Dulles Airport has stated publicly that they do not want people to park there to commute.
Yeah.
Although they have a huge facility, but they want to save that for airport traffic. Well, Reston has a parking garage, doesn't it? Wheeler, yeah. So I think it is a conscious decision. I mean, Vienna has one.
Yes.
Shady Grove, we'll have to see how that works, really. It's an interesting question. I don't.
For those people who are walking distance, it's great.
If you have to drive to the metro, and I had this happen to me yesterday, I'm in Montgomery County, I got to the metro, a lot was full. I went someplace, had something to eat, came back, and I sat until a car came out. If it weren't so cold, I would have ridden my bicycle. Because I'm only 2 miles away from the local metro. But it's a little bit cold. Anybody else? Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I came in late, so I missed it. Are you going to post your slides on the?
I hadn't thought of it, but I could, I'm sure.
Well, we're videoing this.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah, and so we'll put this on our, we put these on YouTube, and you can link to them from the museum website.
Oh, excellent.
So it will be on there. But, I mean, Paul, maybe you could share your slides. You
You can always buy my book.
There you go. Always my internet alley.